Well, you may have heard of his Tad Hacks live events, or you've seen or been forwarded one of his CX Tech news and analysis newsletters, where the C stands for connectivity, communications, collaboration, conversation, and customer. The X for experience, because that's what really matters, and tech, because the focus is enablers. In other words, my guest today, Alan Quayle, is the perfect person to talk to about all things cloud communications. So, what you need to know about Alan is that for nearly 2 decades now, he's worked at the bleeding edge of IT and telecom, building new businesses and services for folks like you may have heard of some of these: Verizon, AT&T, Lucent Technologies, Cambridge Technology Partners, OpenCloud. The list really does go on and on. So, just want to say before we get started with Alan today, you can find out more about his work and sign up for his newsletter at alanquayle.com. Alan, want to say welcome to Commio's first industry briefing for 2023.
Thank you so much, Tim, and thank you for having me. This is a cut down version of what we presented at TAD Summit back in November last year. It's just a version for Commio, but I always like using that logo because then people understand where Commio came from. And it's the combination of both think on the voice side, least cost routing, making Twilio's Billio lower using
Yes,
a,
perfect.
a byline from somebody else,
Yeah.
and also Telly, which is on the SMS side. So I'm going to be focusing on what's happened over the last 3 years, because really it's been a decade squashed into 3 years in the programmable communications space. So what do we mean by programmable communications? Well, it all built on open source projects. So whether it's Asterix, FreeSwitch, Jambones, you name it, all those open source projects that started about 23, 24 years ago have enabled this whole segment to appear. On top of that, of the enablers, the building blocks, CPaaS, excuse me, but also business messaging. So that's the sort of your aggregation piece, exposing SMS APIs, but also packaging it all up so it's easy to use for other enterprises or resellers. On top of that, a whole host of automation technologies, low code, no code, conversation interfaces, VCon, which is a standard for storing and sharing conversation information, whether it's messaging, voice, video. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later. Then the two core pieces of programmable comms, which is employee communications. Once upon a time, we used to call it PBX. Now it's UCaaS, Unified Communications as a Service. I also load collaboration in there. Hey, Zoom's done a great job in growing like crazy, not only in the collaboration space, conferencing space, but also in unified communications. And then customer communications. So that's contact center, messaging, trust, you name it. And then on top of all that, the piece that's always forgotten is the enterprise channel. That is how you package this all up. It could be like Gamma in the UK, which is sort of a telco stroke channel, but you've also got a lot of the telcos now, package it all up as well for their customers. So that's the overall space. And some of the trends are consolidation. We've seen Cinch by company after company after company as it tries to become top dog, and it is by far one of the biggest aggregator in the space. And the other piece is more and more focus on applications, because I'll be frank, that's where the margins are. When you're in the aggregation space, it's a race to the bottom because it's all about size. In the application space, we've seen it holds onto margin far better because you're solving business problems. And that's always the way to make money, is solve a business problem. There's another piece I want to mention before we get down into reviewing what's happened through the past 3 years. And this is important because there's a lot of confusion out there. There's the applications. So this is generally what enterprises buy. So this is the UCaaS, CSaaS, CPaaS, conferencing, identity verification, campaign management, you name it. Even like Zoom. Zoom exposes an API. Now we're using Zoom at the moment, but that service is also exposed through an API, so you can embed conferencing, for example, into your website. And we saw many gyms added that in so they could carry on working through the pandemic. So it's not just the service, but that service can be exposed through an API. There's all the tech. I already mentioned, FreeSwitch, Asterix, Stratio, Jambones, Phonos, WebRTC have all enabled this market to happen over the last 20 plus years. And this is the reason why I draw it out, there's the aggregation piece. So I give some examples here, BIX, Infobip, but this is dealing with hundreds of carriers and aggregators around the world, all the different services, whether it's SMS, MMS, RCS, phone numbers, SIMs, interconnect charging, all the different flavors, whether it's 10 DLC, short codes, 1-800, SMS, SIP, VoIP, and all the different flavors within there, all in compliance with each of the specific regulations, because of course, every country is different. So you've got the aggregation piece. So, Cinch falls into that, but it's trying to expand into the applications. And Twilio is solidly in the application space. Okay. They even didn't want to buy Cineverse. They'd only invest in it because they didn't want to be tainted by all this telco related stuff at the bottom. So that's a little bit of background so you understand what I mean by programmable comms. So let's dive into it. Let's look through what's been happening over the last 3 years, because it's been a decade of experience compared to how this industry normally evolves. So back in Q1 2020, what we were concerned about was all the, fires in Australia. Now, the discussion in the industry back in Q1 2020 was, well, Zoom's got quite a good valuation. How's it going to maintain that? It needs to continue growing at 85% through the rest of 2020. How's that possible? And a similar discussion was happening for Twilio because it had quite an inflated valuation. Now, this is typical, back in the day in terms of the amount of M&A that took place. Enghouse bought Dialogic, but, it was, I remember in January, I ran a TAD hack end of January in Phoenix, Arizona, and people were starting to get a little bit nervous. And then I was actually, start of March, I was in the UK at an event. It was a SimCon, so SimWood event. And I was discussing there about, the lockdowns that the UK were going to implement. I was like, oh, bugger. You know what? That's probably going to be happening in the US soon. So as soon as I got home, I bought some N95 masks, and they proved to be a very good buy for the next few years. And it was in March that the lockdowns began. When we look at Q2, the M&A started to get into gear. So, for example, Cinch bought Wavy, that's in Latin America, but also the big acquisition was of SAP Digital Interactive, and that gave it direct access to the US carriers. And remember, we were worrying about how Zoom going to achieve 85% growth through the rest of 2020. Well, guess what? Because everybody started using conferencing, schools were using conferencing because of the lockdowns, they achieved over 169% year-on-year growth. Looking at Q3, so the picture here is of the Beirut explosion. Still nobody's been found or even tried for what happened there. It was corruption, as always, but we started to see in the programmable comm space some big raises. Lots of acquisitions, IPOs. RingCentral was on a partnership role. All the old PBX guys gave up trying to do UCaaS and basically partnered with RingCentral. Some have been a lot more successful than others in that partnership. And guess what? Twilio, people were worrying about its growth. Well, it achieved 132% revenue growth because we had all the zero touch stuff. So now you turn up to pick up your order. I remember at one point around this time, you could even have zero touch, where basically they put the food order in the back of your car. And of course, it was all done by SMS. Now, RingCentral, They, more of a mixed bag of customers. So they had some customers that were being severely impacted through the pandemic. I'm sure we all see it in our hometowns where they used to be like the Mexican restaurants. Now, it's either closed down or it's another restaurant because of the impact of the pandemic. Then in Q4, of course, we used the mRNA platform to be able to provide the vaccine. So that's where Q4, we worked it out. Looking at the M&A side, well, Twilio bought Segment. And I would say now, at the end of 2022, people really started to understand the importance of that acquisition. Infobip bought into the US market so it could get direct carrier access. And then Cinch raised $1 billion. You'll see, Cinch doesn't like to hold on to $1 billion very long. So we'll see where it spent that money in Q1. Of course, the vaccine started to roll out in Q1, and Cinch bought IntelliQuent. So here we see aggregation not just across messaging, but across voice as well. Calera bought Mgage to get direct access to the US market. Twilio invested in Cineverse and also bought Value First to get a bit better India market access, but also Value First had some deals all around the world as well that could get direct carrier access. This one I like because Gamma, which is a channel, but also sort of a telco, more a reseller, it bought Mission Labs. This was so it could get a company with a lot of experience in using open source, because they realized reselling is a tough business. To own the technology, you then can basically be far more in control of your destiny. Excuse me. Moving on, we have Q2 here for 21. Here's Ingenuity. I always, don't get me started about crazy billionaires talking about putting people on Mars. We could put a damn sight more robots there than people, and it'll be far more cost effective. But anyway, back to the M&A piece. Microsoft bought Nuance. Yes, a whole host of voice tech, which it already had to an extent, but a ton of intelligence and experience in the healthcare industry, which is very important to Microsoft. MessageBird bought email company. Infobip bought a very interesting firewall. Twilio bought ZipWhip. We'll see what it does with ZipWhip in a few quarters. It had been suing it for a long time. So obviously it gave up suing and decided a cheaper option was to buy it. Cinch raised another $1 billion from SoftBank and Temasek, and then used it very quickly to buy Message Media. So again, this is an example of moving more into the application side of the business. But you can see tons of acquisitions taking place through Q2. Moving to Q3, the Olympics finally ran a year late, but this really was a turning point where, we're nearly there. We're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel in terms of the pandemic. I show Ledecky there. She's a swimmer that basically, whether it's 100 meters or 10 kilometers, she swims at the same rate. It's just crazy. When we look at some of the M&A stuff, Aircall raised 120 million on a $1 billion valuation, and they're an app built on Twilio. That's amazing. We saw lots of interesting acquisitions. For example, Broadvoice bought Go Contact, so that's VoIP player buying contact center as a service. Zoom tried to buy Five9, but investors questioned and regulators as well. But I think it was more on the investor side, questioned the value of that deal. TalkDesk completed its Series D funding with a $10 billion. Again, this company began as a hack at a Twilio hack. I'd preferred it was a hack at TATAC, but we have had some interesting companies that form out of TATAC. But again, shows amazing valuations being created. TransUnion bought, so this is like credit risk. They do tons of intelligence about you and I based on all the data they gather. Newstar knows a lot about what we do on the internet. In terms of IP addresses from the telecom side, it's got a whole host of databases. So this is interesting. that an intelligence company is buying an intelligence company focused more from the telecoms side. And we're going to see this as an important trend. And I just highlight here that it's not just the message aggregators that are buying email companies. Intuit, which is, we know from TurboTax, was buying MailChimp. So email is, those email marketing companies we're seeing being bought not just through messaging aggregation, but also through other companies. Then we got to Q4. And, we'd had the Olympics, light was coming at the end of the tunnel, and then Omicron hit us. And it's like, is this ever going to end? And we saw, of course, the peaks because it was very infectious. But back to the M&A. Again, you can see, when it used to be 3 to 5 deals a quarter, we're just seeing tens of deals. So Cinch acquires Pathwire, that's email, paid a crazy price for that. Twilio starts its decline because, people were like, what? The pandemic, yes, we got Omicron, but, the restrictions are starting to be lifted. People have had enough. We saw Infobip by Peerless. So that was VoIP. So again, messaging, buying a VoIP provider. So again, aggregation, consolidation. Mitel resells RingCentral. So again, classic PBX company, basically reselling a UCaaS company. Ericsson makes its bid for Vonage, which is a true programmable comms. It's not just CPaaS, which you bought from Nexmo, but it also delivers VoIP, UCaaS, and CSaaS. Now, Vonage is different companies in different regions. So, North America, very much VoIP, and it's managed that transition from consumer VoIP to business VoIP. In Europe, it's more of a mixed bag. Less so VoIP, more UCaaS, CSaaS, CPaaS. And then in Asia, it has quite a few direct carrier deals for messaging. So it's more of a aggregator, though it has all those other services as well. So that's the end of 2021. Moving into 2022. Well, the thing that was happening in that quarter was the invasion of Ukraine, which is just crazy. Looking at some of the interesting things that happened in that quarter, RingCentral kicked off Rise. So this is its channel support. So it's got all these channels now. Some are good at selling UCaaS, some need some help. So this is a way RingCentral can bring all its expertise and recipe and help those channels sell more. So they really are in a strong position on UCaaS. Radisys introduced its Engage digital platform. And this is a next generation CPaaS. So it enables developers in a low-code, no-code, or through APIs to be able to use not just the communication tools, but a lot of the automation tools, so like chatbots, AI, etc. Now, also in Q1 2022, we saw T-Mo and AT&T increase their 10 DLC rates. They, of course, were looking at all the crazy numbers that analysts were producing on the size of the market, which are wrong. I'm going to talk about that in a couple of slides. Also, the telcos did one API, which failed, and said, hey, we failed on this. Let's repeat that error again with Camera. And Deutsche Telekom, global carrier, had another go at launching its CPaaS. And that's now commercial, and they're partnering as well as have some of its own technology. So it's, telcos are having another stab at playing in this space. Also on the wholesale side, we're seeing carriers get more internationally, less so in North America, get into the A2P SMS space. So it's becoming a lot more competitive. Then in Q2, well, we had the Event Horizon telescope showed us first picture of a black hole. So it's brighter here because the light's coming towards us, light's spinning us away from us there. There's some really nice explanations of the structure of what we're seeing in this black hole. But anyway, enough of the science stuff. What was happening in Q2? Well, it was still busy on an M&A side. You can see lots of stuff happening. Twilio invested $750 million in Cineverse. It doesn't want that telco piece, that aggregation piece, to be part of its focus on applications. History repeated itself. JP Morgan got fined $160 million for brokers using WhatsApp. Well, about 20 years ago, it got fined for its brokers using AOL IM. So it's just like, yeah, they get fined. They're making so much money, they don't learn. Webio, which is a very interesting conversation intelligence company that is in the debt space, raised 4 million. And Aircall, again, another app built on Twilio became a centaur. That is, its its annual recurring revenue exceeded 100 million. There's, again, tons more stuff happening in this space. In Q3, it got a bit dry in Europe. It didn't get as far as the West, because let's face it, the air comes over the Atlantic and then just it's raining. I grew up here on the Isle of Man. So, middle of summer, we could have days where the hottest it got was 14, 15 Celsius. 21 when I was growing up was considered a hot day. The sea remained freezing cold all year round. But it's changed significantly, the weather from when I was a child. But hopping back to all the programmable comms stuff, 60 million people are now using Matrix. So Matrix is a really interesting messaging, open source messaging platform. Of course, it's a lot more than that now, but it enables messaging instances to interoperate. Avaya finally owned up to the fact that all those enterprises that were moving onto UCaaS, CSaaS was impacting its revenues. And then, of course, quickly after that, we saw the layoffs. And I'll rant on about this again. We see revenues from Cinch, Infobit. I mean, Cinch is like 25% of the aggregation market, and with Infobit, you're getting to over a third of the market. And we're being told the whole A2P SMS market is worth 100 billion. And I'm looking at their revenues and going, well, that's a couple of billion. And that's across a number of lines of business. What's going on here? There's a gap. And I covered it in the CX Tech newsletter. I'm going to just give you some examples why you should never believe analysts. And also Twilio started doing some layoffs. Again, this is around margin. And also it was partially to sort of a culture change, because it was changing more to, like Cisco from the early days when it was just JFDI to having lots of middle managers. So I think it was a series of factors that caused it to do those layoffs. But anyway, back to ranting about analysts. So this is a universe of CPaaS and customer experience here, capability. Not in my universe is Vonage better than Twilio. And Infobit isn't even comparable. It should be back over here. Avaya resells a CPaaS, and Cinch is, again, it was just like, my world had been turned upside down when I saw this. And I just show this as an example of why a lot of the stuff analysts produce is just, BS, to be honest. And here, just to show how long they've been doing this, here's some old analysis of the A2P SMS market. Now, Ovum, which is this blue line, they've been predicting the peak A2P SMS for over a decade now. And it hasn't come. SMS continues to grow. Why? Because it just damn well works. It's as simple as that. It reaches everybody, and that will continue for some time. IP messaging is growing. In some countries, I would say we're pretty close to reaching peak SMS because IP messaging is the default. So don't, it is going to change, but we're still years away, particularly here in North America. And, Mobile Squared will produce whatever line you want to see. And again, you can see here, customer had asked for showing great, uptake. I have here also, where is it? Nexmo. The reason they were showing this is they were trying to sell themselves when I was compiling this graph. So again, don't believe the stuff you read on the internet. All right. Then Q4. So we're coming to the end of the 3 years. 75th, birthday for the transistor. This is when digital began. We see all this again, BS around digital transformation, digital economy, digital services. Well, it's 75 years in the making. Looking at what happens, we're starting to, wind down now. You can see the list isn't as long. SoftBank dissolved its stake in Cinch. I mean, it put a couple of billion in there, and it sold its shares at less than a tenth the value to the then CEO and one of the major investors. They're going to make out because Cinch will come back without a shadow of a doubt. VCon, which is a standard for sharing conversation data, became an internet draft. I'll have a link later. Have a read of it to understand what it's going to mean to our industry. And Twilio announces it's going to close ZipWhip. So you first sue them, you buy them, then you close them down. As an example of the dysfunctionality we have here within the North American market for a variety of reasons. I won't name names. So that summarizes the 3 years. Just looking at some of the predictions. These are a bit old now. I've just reused an old slide, but COVID's endemic. We're going to see this 3 days in, 2 days remote with limited, for years to come. We're going to see limited clawback of the UCaaS, CSaaS communications that were implemented during the pandemic. They're here to stay. What we're seeing is the legacy systems are being end of life. That's why Avaya's revenues are in the death spiral they're in. And through the rest of, again, this was from last year, but looking into 2023, cost benefits of UCaaS, CPaaS, CSaaS have become clear. It no longer are we like going, oh God, all our agents aren't in the call center, they're at home. How do we keep the call center up and running? Oh, we can quickly use this UCaaS stuff. It's here to stay. People have realized it's just as reliable, if not more reliable. It's a damn sight cheaper. No longer am I paying as a contact center $1 million for this integration with this particular platform. It's bundled for free, and I can program some of the workflows myself. So it's very much it forced the industry to jump forward by about a decade in adoption of UCaaS, CSaaS, and CPaaS. Now, through 2023, because it's now, it's understood as being, this is the way to operate your business, we're going to see a new phase of cost competition, satisficing, that is not ridiculously long lists of features. We're going to see more focus. So if you're SMB, you don't need a lot of the stuff that you get on some of the big CSaaS or UCaaS platforms. You need something that's just good enough. And of course, improving the experiences as the market continues to mature. So 2022, all focused on getting something consolidated and a move into price competition, delivering more to what the customer needs rather than a laundry list. So where's the industry going? Well, we've been saying this for years now, in terms of from data to information to insights. But what matters is dashboards, single pane of glass, drill down, because this shows how a business is operating on programmable communications. Identity is critical because you can suck out so much insight from what a customer wants or needs using identity. That needs to be clean though, because a lot of the data is dirty. I'm sure we all receive multiple alerts when something gets delivered. That's an example of a lack of data cleanliness in terms of, well, Alan can be contacted through all these ways. Maybe we only need to contact him in one method. And all these conversations that we're having over all these platforms can easily be stored and shared. And what that creates is robot food. So you can feed this into the engines that generate the insights for your customers about their customers and employees. So this we're going to see far more focus. One of the reasons why Twilio bought Segment around data cleanliness, and why we see more and more discussion around identity and dashboards being a core differentiation. So that wraps it up on the half hour. Lots of resources out there. So my weblog, we have the CX Tech newsletter. I try to do it weekly, but sometimes I'm a bit busy. TAD Summit is a conference we run in programmable communications for over a decade. Just go there and you get all the content, videos, slides through over a decade of events. TAD Hack, that's a hackathon focused on programmable communications. Go here and you'll see the thousands of hacks built on programmable communications, some of which have become businesses. Here's the link to get more information around vCon to understand how important it is for our industry. And just a quick advert, if you want independent analysis, insight, advice, contact me, whether it's a 1-hour chat or deep dive projects. Don't waste your time with McKinsey and their MBAs. They believe what's written on the internet. Hopefully, I've already shown you that most of the stuff that's on the internet is BS. Also, the internet's memory is very short. I find myself with my weblog, I've got stuff written there that you can no longer find on the internet. So, history keeps repeating itself. So all that, decades of work at the bleeding edge of programmable communications remains in something relatively organic rather than digital. That is in my brain. So again, thank you, Tim. Thank you, Commio. Think and Telly for giving me the chance to give you a brief share of what's happened in the last 3 years through the pandemic. It's been a decade of evolution squashed into 3 years with some very interesting developments. I hope you found it fun and inciting. Thank you.
Alan, thank you very much for all your insights. I'd love to catch up with you as we get farther into 2023, get even more of your insights as things change. We know there's already some big things on the horizon, so appreciate these insights, and we'll definitely touch base in the near term. Appreciate it, Alan.
Thanks, Tim.